From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It's not often we get to say this in TV news. It wasn't that bad. The closure of exit 22 on Route 95 in Providence was expected to cause traffic chaos for 4 days, but the work was completed way ahead of schedule, avoiding a Monday morning logjam. It's just one piece of the massive viaduct project, so what's next? And what does the state's transportation director think of the latest plan to scrap the Sakonnet River Bridge tolls? Our guest in the first half of Newsmakers, Rhode Island Department of Transportation Director Mike Lewis. Then, arrest reports assaulted by a magic marker. Food receipts for dinners taxpayers paid for redacted. Emails from public officials blocked. At the start of National Sunshine Week, a roundtable explores the state of government transparency in Rhode Island. Our guests on the second half of Newsmakers, Common Cause Rhode Island Executive Director John Marion and columnist for the Providence Journal, Ed Fitzpatrick.
Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, my colleague, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi. Good morning, everyone. Director Lewis, welcome back to the program.
Great to be here with you both.
So as we pointed out at the top of the show there, the project on Route 95 last weekend wrapped up early, avoiding traffic problems. Is this a case of, you said it was going to take 4 days and you delivered it in 2 so you'd look good, overpromise?
You know, everything we do is all about image. So, no, the issue there is we had to, as part of the construction of the southbound portion of the Providence Viaduct I-95, we have to actually widen some of the bridge decks on the ramps that already exist. And you can't place concrete on a deck under live traffic. So what we had to do is close down the ramp while that work was done and allow the concrete to set up sufficiently, to harden sufficiently, so that the traffic vibrations wouldn't negatively affect the concrete. So we took samples during the course of the weekend, and when it achieved a level of strength that we were comfortable with, we knew we could open it. But we didn't know how that was going to play out, and so we wanted to be sure that we gave people enough advance warning that it could be as late as Tuesday morning. Our goal was always to make it earlier if we could. We were able to do that, so we avoided.
And just so people remember, the viaduct is that stretch of I-95 next to Providence Place Mall.
That's right, over Route 10, over the railroad. It's it's a longer than 800-foot bridge. People don't probably drive on 95. They don't even know they're crossing.
They don't know it's a bridge, right?
Yeah, it's a very big bridge.
Huge project, right?
Yep, it's one of the bigger ones that the state has undertaken.
So for people watching this, what is going to be the next headache for commuters in terms of the viaduct project?
It's a very similar. It's being designed and constructed in a very similar manner to what was the Pawtucket River Bridge up in Pawtucket on 95 that we experienced over the last 5 years or so, and it's designed to, as best as we can, avoid any impacts on traffic. So we shouldn't be seeing any kind of impact like we had over this past weekend, which is fairly minor, for another year, because most of the construction is being done outside of the footprint of the existing
How worried
highway.
are you about the integrity of the bridge right now? Does it keep you up at night?
No, that doesn't keep me up at night. Other things keep me up at night.
What keeps you up at night?
But the bridge is in poor structural shape, but it's inspected on a regular basis. We've done, over the course of years, interim improvements, repairs, cracked steel and what have you. The bridge is safe. Nobody should be worried about driving on the bridge. The problem is its service life is coming to an end, and we could never be in a position of waiting till it's the end of its life and then taking care of the replacement.
How old is it?
It was built in the mid-'60s as part of the interstate highway construction, as part of the I-95 construction. There was a period of time, I think it was either in the 80s, I think it was in the 80s, that there was you may remember this, there was a closure of 95 because
I might, Ted definitely won't.
A crack
I didn't say it.
through one of the entire steel girders. Oof. Cracked because the steel was a brittle steel, and the codes have changed. We wouldn't be using that kind of steel anymore. But it was the state of the art at the time. Yeah. But it had real structural problems.
And I know there's a plan to finish the whole bridge. I know we have other things to talk about, but just briefly, what's your plan for replacing? When will we be driving over the finished new viaduct bridge?
So we're doing it in 2 different stages, 2 different contracts. The southbound first, and that will be complete by the end of 2016. And then once the southbound will be driving on a completely new bridge, then we'll be able to do is shift the northbound traffic over onto the existing southbound bridge today. Then we'll be able to tear down the northbound and build a new northbound bridge. So that will take place over the course of the latter part of this decade.
All right, we want to talk about the Secaunet River Bridge tolls. Portsmouth Representative Jay Edwards was a guest on the show last week. He has a bill that he says is gaining momentum up on Smith Hill that completely overhauls how the state funds transportation, and it would eliminate the tolls on the Secaunet. You don't like it. How come?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it that way. First of all, as I said
You have concerns about
in
it.
my testimony, is that I applaud both Representative Edwards, Senator Palmer, and others that have worked on the bill for being really taking this problem of our lack of investment in infrastructure, taking it very seriously and looking at creative options, and I mean that sincerely. They have a plan. They've recognized the scale of their problem, so they've tried to address the need over a period of 10 years to come up with a funding plan of $100 million a year, which is, it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but it's about what we need to be doing to invest in our roads and bridges. My concern with the plan is that it doesn't rely on new revenues. So that means to cover that $100 million a year, you have to come out of existing revenues. And so somewhere in the state budget, something's going to suffer. And so I just, from a transportation perspective, investing that much in transportation is absolutely what we need. But in terms of other needs the state has, and that's not nobody pays me for this, okay, I'm the transportation guy. The legislature, other departments of the administration have to think about what kind of impact that's going to have on the overall state budget.
But it sounds like it's a level of funding that you'd be pleased to have if, again, if they could find that money.
It absolutely is the right target for the level of investment that we need in infrastructure to get it into a state of good repair so that our economy can count on a sound infrastructure. It's not something that's going to happen instantaneously. This is over a period of 10 years. But we need to begin to find ways to invest at that level so that we can all count on our transportation.
So your
infrastructure.
concern is the impact on the other departments in the state and what that would mean?
And its ability to succeed because of those impacts on other services. Again, that's the job for the legislature to figure out how to strike that balance. My concern is, be careful that it looks like it's a panacea. If it actually is not able to survive at that level, then we don't have the investment level that we need.
Part of the bill would put a skeleton crew from the Rhode Island Turnpike and Bridge Authority under your office, okay? And that would be so they could continue to toll on the Newport Pell Bridge. Look, there's a perception that sometimes RITBA doesn't spend money on things that are central to their cause. What's your opinion? Are they lean and mean, or is there fat over there?
No, I think they are. I sit on the board. I mean, people need to, if they aren't aware of that, the Director of Transportation sits on the board of Turnpike and Bridge Authority, just as I sit on the board of the Rhode Island Transit Authority. So I'm involved in those decisions. The fact is that the Turnpike and Bridge Authority have a very specific task to ensure that the two bridges, prior to law that was passed that added the other two, but that the Newport Pell Bridge and the Mount Hope Bridge are kept in a state of good repair and that are safe, and they're there for the state to rely on for decades to come. That's their job. That's what they do. They do that, and the way they do that, the only source of revenue they get is from tolling on the Pell Bridge. So their staffing is largely driven by how do you collect the revenues, the tolls, and all the back office work that needs to collect $18.5 million a year through revenue through a toll plan.
So you think it's a tight ship over there?
In any organization, there are always improvements. In my organization, there are improvements. There are efficiencies that you could make. I would bet in this organization, there are efficiencies you can make. And nobody can say...
Tim.
For example, nobody can say, I wouldn't believe anybody that says there aren't additional efficiencies. There's a point of time when there's a point of diminishing returns. And I think there are models across the country in both ways, that the toll collecting entity is within the Department of Transportation as a division, and there are equal number that they're separate entities. And they were set up as separate entities because, for the very specific reason, it's very difficult to, the fear is that tolls are collected on one facility and then they're drawn away and put on other things. And so the original intent was to address the maintenance, the long-term maintenance of those facilities is diminished. So, the George Washington Bridge, these very significant structures, the Golden Gate Bridge, these are separate entities that take the tolls in and go to those projects. So I think the model can work both ways. I don't think one is right, one is wrong. I think there's a fallacy that there would be a great deal of personnel savings if you were to incorporate it into RIDOT, because you still have to collect all the tolls. You have all that back office work. You still have to be able to have maintenance crews that are actually doing the work on the bridge, and you have to have personnel that will oversee the construction contracts and the engineering contracts. Some of that can be incorporated into RIDOT, but then you would have more work for RIDOT, so you'd need more people. So I'm not sure that there's a great deal of personnel savings, but again, I'm not going to say one model is can't work versus the other.
I don't know if you've heard there are some potholes in Rhode Island this winter.
I've heard that.
The rumors are out.
Yeah.
Many of them aren't on roads you're responsible for.
Right.
You're only responsible for about 1/6 of all the roads in the state, right?
What people should know too is I lost 3 rims on my own car the Monday before Christmas.
All right, so
I feel their pain.
All right. But what I'm curious about is, some people say, suck it up, everybody. It's winter in New England, and we're going to have potholes, and that's life. But, I've also read things suggesting that if you maintain the roads, maybe the potholes wouldn't be as bad. You're the roads guy.
Right.
I mean, how much is this just winter that we have to deal with, and how much is this, are there choices we could be making about maintenance and funding that might make this not as bad?
I think that's a great question. In this kind of climate and environment, if the pavement isn't maintained, you will develop, physics will require you to develop potholes because the water will get through the pavement, into the subbase. Ice lenses will form. As we all know, ice enlarges when it expands when it freezes. That puts pressure on the pavement breaks, then the ice melts and creates a cavity, and then you've got the trucks and cars driving over it, and it forms the pothole. That's the physics of how this works. The way to avoid that is to prevent water from getting into the pavement structure, and the way to avoid that is to ensure that the pavement is maintained in a sound condition throughout the life of the roadway. Now, you don't maintain a road by repainting it. You maintain a road by, if the cracks develop, you do crack sealing. When the pavement gets to the end of its service life, then you go into a program where you can mill the pavement off and replace it. Pavement in this environment should last 10 to 15 years. We have pavements out on the roadway that are 20 years old. Some of them are more than 20 years old. And you can no longer, you will get potholes because the water will get through those pavements. So we have a deficit. There's probably over 300 miles of state-owned roads that are in poor or failed condition because we as a state haven't invested in the replacement or the rehabilitation of those roads over the years.
That sounds almost, based on the context of this entire conversation, funding for this, funding for that, that sounds almost insurmountable. Like Rhode Island is set up to fail in terms of potholes.
Yeah, it's not. Rhode Island shouldn't assume that they're the only state in the country that faces this. If you went to any of your colleagues in Massachusetts, in New Hampshire, in New York, the same story would be happening because in the Northeast, in this climate, we have this condition. There are other states that invest more in infrastructure than we do on a relative basis, and so you might get we may be worse off than others. But it's not insurmountable, but we have to face up that it doesn't solve itself. And there are a lot of demands on state resources. I absolutely understand that. But until we start to get ahead of it, it's going to get worse and worse.
Rhode Island Department of Transportation Director Mike Lewis, thanks so much for joining us on the program.
My pleasure to be here.
All right, when we come back, be prepared to get your transparency on. We have Sunshine Week is upon us. A roundtable on transparency with Ed Fitzpatrick from the Providence Journal and John Marion from Common Cause, Rhode Island. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and we're doing a roundtable on transparency. To my immediate left is Ed Fitzpatrick from the Providence Journal, and we have John Marion, the executive director from Common Cause, Rhode Island. Now, Sunshine Week is a national week to draw attention to government transparency, the importance of access to public information. As they all like to say, open government is good government. And disclosure, I'm a board member of the New England First Amendment Coalition that works for greater transparency in government. All right, so with all that, let's go around the table in the spirit of Sunshine Week, gentlemen. What's top of mind right now in terms of transparency? In other words, your top transparency trouble in Rhode Island. John, what do you have?
So, our perennial one is I'm a legislative lobbyist on behalf of all the issues we're going to talk about, and I'm up at the Assembly every night and sort of trying to crack the nut that is the opaque process up there, particularly the last couple of weeks when all the deals happen and the public gets left out. And so that's perennially our.
To just waive the open meetings laws because they want to.
Well, they're not subject to the open meetings laws. They voluntarily comply, but that voluntary compliance goes out the window in the last couple of weeks.
All right, Ed, what do you have?
Well, I just think we have knee-jerk secrecy in a million little different ways. And like this week, we saw the Judicial Nominating Commission was talking about having more closed-door discussions about the people who want to be our state judges. You see it with emails from elected officials that we can't get a hold of. You see it with judges saying we can't see the depositions in the 38 Studios case. So I'd rather see more knee-jerk transparency.
I like it. What do you got, Ted?
I was actually thinking about Angel Tavares this week because I have a thumbs up and a thumbs down for him. He's been campaigning to release the full partnership agreement that the city pension fund struck with Point Judith Capital, which of course was Gina Raimondo's firm, which of course he's running against her for governor, so there might be another reason he's thinking about it. But that's good, right? We want contracts out there. We want to know what is in these things, and I think that's good. What's frustrating is that, for all that they're talking about their belief in transparency at City Hall, 2 years ago, you remember, Tim, you and I did that story. We tried to get the emails that former Mayor Cicilline sent explaining how the city got in such intense financial trouble that bankruptcy was being discussed. And we got a blanket denial in 48 hours. It wasn't even like there'd been a big discussion about, can we give them anything? They just said, we don't have to. We're not going to. And I wish that Mayor Tavares would take the same approach to transparency on something that's not directly relevant to someone he's running against, because transparency matters all the time, not just when it could hurt your opponent.
So the perception is it was politically expedient for him to bring up the Point Judith documentation.
And again, I don't want to push that too much because you want to take your allies where you can find them. If he's going to push for this now and he has other reasons that it's on his mind, great, we can get more information out there. Sure. But it's important that it also comes out when it's not. It's important to have rules that allow information to come out even when it's not. There's no political reason for someone to support us, some public official. So,
John, he brought up emails. We should point out that the way our law is now, our Access to Public Records Act, correspondence to and from elected officials they're not open. Mm-hmm. We can't get those. So that's obviously in 2014. That's 100% emails. And it was something, as I remember, that the changes that were made to APRA 2 years ago, the bill would have died over that. I mean, this is something that shocking elected officials don't want to happen. Why should emails be made public? What's the argument for it?
So open government advocates went sort of with a laundry list for 4 or 5 years to the Assembly trying to make changes to our public records law, which literally has exceptions A through Z. We added last year Y and Z to that list. and we went with our laundry list, and really the first thing thrown overboard in the negotiations over the bill was the correspondence of the public officials. We recognize there are times public officials, when they're talking to their constituent, maybe their constituent's complaining about a problem in their town, maybe it's like a whistleblower situation. There are times when these things should be kept private, but there are lots of other protections in that law to keep things private. There's really only one class of individuals in government who's blanket allowed to not be subject to the public records law, and that's the elected officials. Director Lewis, not subject to that. He's not elected, he's appointed. Very important man, as we just saw. But his boss, Governor Chafee, isn't subject to it.
What though? If I put in a records request for Director Lewis's emails, what are the chances, do you think, that I'm actually going to get those?
Yeah, so my experience, my hands-on experience is correspondence generally, unless you specifically go after, there's a correspondence out there, you're not going to get it. And that's a problem too. That's not a legal problem, that's a cultural problem.
And the importance of this, just to make it real to people at home, I mean, the perfect example is, as always, 38 Studios. Part of how we know there were people who saw that initially was that damning email from Sean Eston, a financial portfolio manager at the EDC in June 2010. And what are his words there? Because people speak plainly in email. He said, I have more information, I think, on a $10,000 micro loan than I do on this proposal for $75 million that's going through. That is a very important piece of how we understand, okay, this was going through real fast, and there were people saying this wasn't a good idea. So these emails matter.
And we should point out, I mean, in other states, you can get emails. If we step outside the Rhode Island bubble, I've had experience in Massachusetts because our market covers southeastern Massachusetts. I've gotten emails from the sheriff's office there. We all remember Sarah Palin when those emails were released from the time when she was a governor in Alaska. Congressman David Cicilline, we always ask him about it on the show, and he made the point on here, well, look, why shouldn't we be able to do our job and have candid conversations with some of our staffers about important issues? Why is he wrong, Ed?
Well, these are elected officials conducting public business. This is how they communicate. It's not the proposal that most states pursue is not, constituent communication, but talking to other elected officials about the public's business. I think the public has an interest in that, and we should see it.
All right, I want to bring up, since we used it at the top of the show, I want to explain it. We had some receipts that we asked from the Providence School Department, and they blacked out the food that was ordered from a restaurant. Now, what's important here is you paid for this meal because it was on a taxpayer credit card, if you will. And they said, gentlemen, that their explanation was it was an invasion of personal privacy to put what they ate on this meal. And that is the balancing test, a new balancing test that is in the Public Records Act. Now, to their credit, I pushed back at this, and they gave me the receipts, and it revealed some pretty nice meals that were on there. But that is one of the aspects to the law that was changed 2 years ago. Other things that got in there that were great is public official contracts are now available. It made more pension records open and tightened up the language on arrest reports, so there's probably some work there to be done. But the balancing test, that's kind of the squishy one. The Journal made a little bit of noise because they felt that the balancing test was being applied to things it shouldn't be, specifically police reports, and that it actually sort of backfired a little bit. Where are we on that? Do you think the balancing test isn't working? Was that a problem? It's modeled after the federal law, the FOIA. Are we seeing anything there? John, we were on a panel about that.
Yeah, so the problem with the balancing test is it's going to take a generation to know. Because the way the balancing test works is the person who's in charge of the record has to make a determination. Is it an unwarranted invasion of the privacy of the person in the record? And sometimes organizations, news organizations most likely, are going to sue and say, we don't think it's an invasion of privacy. And it's going to be up to a Superior Court judge or ultimately the Supreme Court to make that decision. We specifically put in the law a reference to the Federal Freedom of Information Act because there's a huge case law about
body of work there.
Different records and different types of information, what's unwarranted and what's not, and the definition of that. But it's going to take those cases coming up through the courts, and that's going to take a long time. So we're probably not going to have a really sufficient answer. There are going to be growing pains. It's good, it's important, the media pushed back, the Journal pushed back on those police records, and I think ultimately the police in Providence recognize that.
Go ahead, Ed. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that we didn't win the battle by just passing the law. I think we have to fight every day. And if they say the U-12 shrimp are off limits, you have to push back to say, we should know. We paid for those shrimp. And it doesn't always take a lawsuit to do that. I think it's up to us.
And Ted, we're talking, both of them talking about sort of in the context of the media, meaning that we might have the wallet that can bring it to court and fight it and then set precedent. But is this really all this conversation about a bunch of whiny reporters that just want to make it easier to get the big scoop?
We never whine. I think all the viewers know that. No, it's not. And I think it's such a good point because I think open records aren't just about scandalous, emails from Sarah Palin, if there were any scandals, I can't remember, or the audit you got recently about Beta Spring and Lion Park, and questions about how money is being managed. It's also just about basic information being easily accessible to the public. You can make John's worked on this in Providence actually. You can make records theoretically available, but if people can't actually get to the information they're trying to, it's effectively secret. And I think of the struggles we've had here at Channel 12 at times in recent years getting basic financial information about the cities and towns. I mean, they manage hundreds of millions of dollars in these pension funds, and when you and I have tried to figure out, are they investing it well? How much are they paying in fees? What are they getting in returns? First of all, it's not easily accessible in any way. You can't just go on a website and ask. And it took us, in some cases, months of emailing to try to help them understand what to look for. I mean, there's no scandal there. No one's arguing it's secret. But if you can't get to the information, how are people supposed to watch over their government and know how their business and their money is being conducted?
Ed, in 30 seconds, 911 calls, not open, not publicly available here. Should they be, and why?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're one of only 6 states that say they're off limits. And, I think it's the front line of public safety, and we've got an interest in knowing whether when you call for help, it's handled well, if the response is what we expect. And we really don't know in Rhode Island. So I think it's time we join the majority of other states.
Around the table once more. Letter grade for Rhode Island transparency. Ted.
A C.
John.
Oh, I think it's a little better, a B, B minus, but improving.
What do you got,
Yeah,
Ed?
C plus.
Yeah, I'll give it a C. You don't want your kids to come home with
Did
that.
you
on
guys see the
report
Daily
card.
Roundtable Herald on grade inflation this week? I don't know.
Ted Nesi from WPRI.com, Ed Fitzpatrick from the Providence Journal, and John Marion from Common Cause Rhode Island. Gentlemen, thank you very much. If you missed any of it, online, WPRI.com. I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.